Um, and then just a few thanks. First, we want to thank Liz Eisner, Matt Soldner, and our project officer, Amy Johnson, each of whom shared some great suggestions for ways to make this presentation more useful and more engaging. We also want to thank our partners at CDI, Meta de Cacaramo and Chris Trott there, who did the REL reports and helped us prepare for this as well. I'm going to be joined in this webinar by two colleagues, Marisa Herman, who's going to be presenting part of this, and also Ruth, who's our Deputy Director for REL Peer Review. She'll be facilitating some of the chat interactions. And we get started. Is Liz Eisner there to help us kick off?
Yes, I am.
Great. Yes. Hi, hi, Liz.
Hi, Josh. Can you hear me now?
Yes. Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Thank you. Yeah, hi, everyone. I think I know most of you. I'm Liz Eisner, the Associate Commissioner for the Knowledge Use Division in IES. And I'm just going to kick this off with a few main points to help frame our discussion. So this is something you all know, but it's really important to always remember that the REL's mission is really to help policymakers and educators and administrators use rigorous research to improve educational outcomes for students. And these people, as our key stakeholders, we all know they have very limited time to read the REL's applied research reports. And so this is why we really want REL reports. We continue to emphasize the need for REL reports to be very clear, not very long, and very pithy in a lot of ways, so that people who really are very busy can see the main points and digest them very quickly. Now, having said that, this session will be talking about some of the vision that IES has for what we mean by clear and accessible reports, and specifically things where we've seen some of the reports haven't kind of lived up to our vision as much as they could. So this is why we wanted to have this session to talk about these particular elements of clear and easy to digest reports. There have, of course, been some reports that definitely met this vision, but because we saw some that didn't, we thought this was important to go over. The one point I want to add to that is, I come from a public policy background. My degree is a master's in public policy, where I was really taught to write for very, very busy policymakers. And we even had a course in my program that was just about writing for policymakers. And we often had to write just a one page to summarize a report or a whole bunch of reports or a complex policy issue. And in order to do that, we were encouraged to draft something and to revise it and revise it again, and revise it again. So really what I was learning in that course was how to edit my own work to make it as easy to read and digestible and as pithy as possible. And so one thing that I know Josh and his team are going to mention is, although we're talking about the end goal here and what it looks like, I think I wanted to also have them emphasize, and I want to emphasize that I think anyone can meet these end goals. I think it's a matter of taking time to come back to one's writing and editing it again and again and again, as much as you can, so that you can make something shorter and easier to read by looking at it a few more times after you draft it. And of course, your colleagues who review reports for you to make sure they're clear, are helping with that as well. But I just can't emphasize enough the importance of reworking your writing. Because I certainly, even to this day, every email I write is way too wordy, and I try to take the time to go back and edit it. And I'm amazed at how much I can cut out each time I write just an email. That I write something that just has much too much language in it. And so that's just one point I wanted to make. Okay, well, thank you for letting me say these few words of introduction, and I'll turn it back to you, Josh.
Thanks a lot, Liz. And I just want to parts of what you said, Liz, particularly that we recognize REL staff are performing such an important function and a challenging function in writing these reports for very busy educators. And that you're synthesizing often a lot of evidence to answer their questions and communicating it in a way that they can digest. So thanks a lot, Liz. So this is how we thought we'd structure this webinar. First, we really want to hear from you about the challenges you've been facing drafting REL reports. You've got a lot of collectively here in doing this. And we're going to ask you to do this in two ways. First, again, at the menti.com website, there's a polling question that we'll get to in a minute. But then we're going to ask you also to chat additional comments and examples of challenges you face. And that can inform some of the rest of what we discussed today. We are then going to share some guidance relating to some common challenges that folks face in writing reports in this very clear, accessible, succinct way, and share some tools and resources and suggested processes that can support good writing. So first, let's go to the polling question. So if you haven't gotten to menti.com, you can get to it a couple of different ways. You can click on that link that Ruth Neal provided in the chat window. If you don't see that, just go to the website menti.com and enter this 7-digit code, 5861747. And you should see then this polling question. And what we'd like you to do is just check off the most common challenges that your team has faced in writing REL reports. And this is a multiple choice question because that's the easiest way to get input from this large group. So do read through all 9 of these options. You'll have a chance in the chat window to offer other kinds of writing challenges. But among these 9, you can check off up to 3 of them that you've experienced and think are common and important. And then we're going to just collectively look at your answers to see which ones stand out. So I'll give you just another 30 seconds. Go there. Hopefully we'll see some answers here. Menti is thinking about it. There we go. Look at that. Okay. So we see plain language. Good answers here. Implications, or when the results are mixed or ambiguous. Plain language. Inconsistent comments from REL Peer Review or CDI. That's fair enough. We know we could improve that way. Strong topic sentences. Alignment of motivation questions, findings, and implications. Sticking to the 15-page limit. confusing or unclear guidance seems to be the ones that stand out. Okay. Maurice, sounds like we better include a little something on plain language. Up here, we got some more. We have, we've been juggling which issues to focus on today. So we have various appendix slides we can draw on. Okay, so now if we could also ask people to go to the chat bubble at the bottom of your WebEx, click on that and get to the chat window on the right-hand side. Maybe you have it open already. And just share an example of a writing challenge you faced. It could be related to one of those 9 issues in the Menti poll or something totally different. But we just like to get a little bit more open-ended input from you. Anyone has any example you can share? Okay. Do you want to help us summarize and read?
Yeah, so we have 2 so far, as others are coming. Jessica Bailey says how to write in plain language, in particular to complex statistical methods and results, like predicted probabilities. There's another one about describing complex methods. So there's really 2 issues identified about complexity. Another challenge is answering the implicit question about so what? Finding out about new or evolving guidance after things are drafted. So retrofit or keep up to date. Managing contradictions. How to know what to cut when feedback puts the report over a 15-page limit. That's very good. We'll be talking about that later. Okay, another question which is really about managing the complexity and writing in plain language. Really how do you do both? And how do you do it in 15 pages? More about complex methods in plain language. We're seeing a theme here. Another variant on this. Very good. Balancing use of very consistent, precise terminology with writing in a lively and compelling way. That is a high standard. Keeping up with the guidance as it evolves. Balancing comprehensive reporting of patterns and data with focusing in on key takeaways. How can you be both comprehensive and yet focused and targeted at the same time? More questions about technical detail and how to balance that and manage that in 15 pages. Wow, there's just a lot of variations on a theme. So that's interesting. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Well, please keep these coming because we're going to collect these things and be thinking about how we can respond to these and other comments. I think you'll see that a lot of the rest of this presentation is designed to address most of these things. I'm not sure whether we're going to fully capture the answers to some of them. I just thought about this issue of balancing plain language against capturing methodologically complex technical details. You know, what we usually suggested is that it is important to cover technical details sometimes, but it's best to confine things that are not particularly accessible to an appendix. Uh, and yeah, so Marisa is skipping ahead here to a plain language example, but I think, you know, one way to think about it is if you are trying to explain your key findings to a friend or family member who knows nothing about the subject or just knows some basics related to education, how would you do that? So it can be a challenge, but I'm sure you've faced that challenge often. Um, and that we do need to define our terminology, but we don't necessarily need to include all the technical material in the body of a report. Uh, Marisa, do you want to share more about that right now?
Sure. Do you want me to start? I was thinking maybe we could start with this plain language example, since there was so many comments about plain language and sort
Sure.
of technical. So yeah, so I mean, as all y'all are acknowledging, you know, plain language is important, and it's challenging to sort of express things in plain language while still sort of maintain technical precision sometimes. We wanted to share this example. What we did for the slide deck was we found some nice examples of REL writing that we felt were good illustrations of the guidance. And then we created some fake examples to sort of illustrate like common writing issues. And so on the left, we sort of have what a nice plain language finding that discusses whether these interim assessments adequately identify at-risk students, which was the stakeholders' needs. And then on the right, we're sort of showing example that is a bit less plain language because it includes some jargon for the assessment names, and it's also not clear, you know, like whether 61 to 69% of students being identified is accurate enough. And so I think maybe one thing about the example on the left is that it sort of has a little bit of interpretation that can also help stakeholders understand that, you know, what they were wondering was um, whether, you know, kids were adequately identified. I think there was a question. If Ruth, if you wanted to read it out.
An additional example, working with a stakeholder with a fairly high level of technical expertise, but also needing to make findings accessible to a broader audience.
Is the question like, do we have an additional example of that, or
I think this is a good example, Marisa,
okay.
that you're sharing here, and maybe we should just move on so we can get input later on some of
Sure.
the other issues.
So I think we can go back up to this issue of alignment. And, you know, we wanted to note that the reports are aiming to tell a complete story starting from the stakeholders' need in the why the study section, the research questions that address that need, findings that address the research questions, and implications that provide an actionable next step for stakeholders based on the findings. And that note that aligning these sections of the report can help stakeholders more easily follow the story. So we wanted to just share a nice example of a report that had good alignment across these sections. So the why the study motivates a specific research question by describing how stakeholders needed to know what characteristics were associated with principal retention, mobility, and attrition because they wanted to develop supports and incentives to improve principals' recruitment and retention. We have here that the research questions asks what characteristics of principals are associated with mobility as well as retention. We have findings headings that then address the characteristics that are associated with mobility. So you can see in this example, it's principals who are younger, those who identify as a racial or ethnic minority, and those who earn a lower salary. And then the implication section was aligned, and that it was noting that state and district decision makers could consider providing supports to those groups that had higher mobility. And we created some examples of, while this report had good alignment, some reports are not as well aligned. And so we created some examples of ways in which misalignment can appear, which you can refer to in the appendix of these slides, which we've shared. So I think one of the common writing challenges that folks mentioned was topic sentences. And, you know, reading just the topic sentences is a great way for busy readers to quickly skim the report and get the main story. So to help these audiences, it's important to confirm that someone can just read the topic sentences and easily digest the main points of the report. And so here we have a couple examples of nice topic sentences where you can just read those. And in the first paragraph, you can understand the context. And in the second paragraph, you can understand the need for the study in the region. Okay, so we have this slide that's on implications, but I think I'm going to skip it in the interest of time. And you can refer to this later. We had a bunch of questions, I know, about what implications might be appropriate when findings are mixed or ambiguous. And this was also a nice question that we received from a REL. So we have some general guidance here, and we'd also be grateful for other ideas. So, you know, the first thing is just that less is more. It's okay to have like only one implication if that's all that's supported by the findings. It's also okay for findings in the report to not have specific implications in the implications section. And if there is really no action that a stakeholder could take, it seems like that suggests that there might be a need for stakeholders or researchers to investigate something further. And so perhaps implications section could suggest how they might build on the current study. We also got a great question from REL about how to prioritize findings, giving the 15-page reports. And this was something I think that was echoed in the Mentee poll. So, you know, especially when reviewers have asked you to elaborate on some key points. And so here was some general guidance that we thought of for this. One thought is that to help you figure out the most important findings to mention, you could consider working backwards, starting with the implications. So, you know, what are the actionable next steps for stakeholders? And then given that, what findings do you need to discuss to support those implications? And then, you know, aligning the why the study section and the research questions with those key findings and those main implications. And it's often appropriate to retain research questions and key findings, even if they don't seem to have any implications. But, you know, then you may not need to devote as much space to those particular findings. And you can also include supplemental material in the appendices. This might allow you to include very streamlined tables and figures in the main body. And you can also describe text in the main body and refer to materials that are in the appendix. So here we have sort of just to open it up a little bit. I think you can include in the chat if you have other questions about the guidance on writing.
This is Amy Johnson. I'm just gonna, can I just jump in for a second? I think I'm just gonna propose a sort of summary of some of what was just presented that addresses people's concerns about balancing technical complexity with writing in plain language, since that seems like the overarching or kind of one of the bigger issues that people are struggling with. So I think if in writing and revising and reviewing, if we all take a focus on making sure that we use that alignment tool that was sent out previously, and we saw on a previous slide, to make sure that the main points, the topic sentences, the findings headers, if those are all written in plain, clear language with simple, short sentences, no jargon, if those main points are easy to follow throughout the report, are easy for people to understand, then your average reader will be able to follow the story. And within those paragraphs, within the tables, certainly within the appendices, The methods box, that's where you can really explain the complexities. But as long as, it's easy to skim through the headers, the research questions, the main topic sentences of the implications, I think if you start each paragraph with a clear, easy to understand takeaway, you can still continue on to talk about the complexities and everything that, the technical reader will need, but your average reader will be able to get the gist. So I think if we all pay more attention to alignment and topic sentences, I think that will help address a lot of these other issues. So just an idea for as you're writing and revising, to focus on those things, and hopefully it will follow that it'll be a good balance of plain language while also including, the technical complexities as necessary. I don't know if anybody has any thoughts about that or questions, but that's my suggestion.
There is a
Awesome, Amy. Go ahead, Ruth.
well, there's a related comment, I think with an implied question from Jessica Bailey in the chat. And she says, regarding strong topic sentences, in the REL report format, we have a header sentence that is the key finding. And then we typically don't repeat that finding in the paragraph below. So that's why it's sometimes a struggle to write strong topic sentences for each paragraph. That strikes me as kind of an interesting issue. And I wondered if you wanted to respond.
Yeah, that is a challenge. I found that challenging in my own writing. And I think Jessica's right, you don't want to repeat the header in the topic sentence. So it's best to see if you can somehow have a higher heading that captures more than a single paragraph, but chunk up the paragraphs to take on a piece of that. And sometimes it might be necessary to take a step back in the first paragraph with a very short paragraph about the context, though the context is often mostly confined in the why this study section. So I think that is a challenge, but I think authors, do find ways to break up the points that support the key heading.
So some of the other comments from the chat are actually related to that, and they're really some requests for examples. So Steve Plank is wondering if there are any sort of exemplar research reports. Matt's sort of saying, well, we're not sure we have about enough 15-page reports yet where you have any favorites. But there is also a question about whether there could be example guidance for how people have managed to write good headings that are not, and then create paragraphs that are not, with topic sentences that are not redundant to the header. So that strikes me as a good follow-up. Having some models. Amy Fagan is seconding Jessica as well.
We can find something. Let's look at that.
Some other suggestions here.
Yeah. Other questions or comments about these issues? Most recent one about the complexities introduced in the data source and methods and key terms boxes. And I think, while it's good to have those be somewhat accessible, I think many readers just skip over the data and methods box. It's in a box, so you can do that. So while it's nice to make that fairly accessible and put the most complex parts of it in an appendix, we understand that it may not be accessible to all readers all the time. Okay, well, let's maybe keep going. So now we're just share some tools, resources, and processes that can be helpful. First, a list of tools and resources. So these various resources that you may have seen before. I think IES recently shared the annotated report that we developed recently, which is a real REL West report, which is a nice report with alignment across the sections. And the annotations we've added really call out, just name what type of content belongs in each part of the report, including the summary and why this report, why this study, etc. And by the way, we're going to share these resources with you in a zip file after the webinar. And they'll also be at the website, the SharePoint tracking website that's accessible to members of your team who post stuff on that SharePoint site. There's also the checklist and alignment tool, which I think has been shared earlier. Identifies some common challenges and solutions, and that four-column alignment tool to check alignment across the why this study, research questions, findings, and implications. There's a checklist that CDI has developed with some common style issues and guidelines related to them. And then there's the longer guidance that was updated in 2019. It covers not just writing issues, but also technical relevance and usability guidance. There's the writer's guide and style from 2015. It has some additional useful guidance. And here we've shared one report that Mark Donarski and Ellen Kisker produced about research in language. And if you go into the slides, you can just click on that hyperlink. Okay. Now, we'd also like to just ask whether other tools that you folks have found useful or think should be developed to make writing better and easier.
We have one question about that so far. Are there any plans? Are there any plans to update the style guide? Oh, there's 2 questions about that now.
Okay.
Oh, now there's 3.
That is something we've been thinking about. Amy, do you want to take that question?
Yes. Okay. So we only have one version of the REL style guide, and it's from 2015. We will be updating that soon. As Josh mentioned earlier, we know that we have, as listed on that previous slide, a whole bunch of different documents with different pieces of the guidance, from style to technical requirements to various tip sheets to examples, spread across lots of different documents. So we are going to be, sending them out in one email to everybody, but also saving them all in one place in the SharePoint site. So you'll always be able to find them all in one place. And we will let you know when the new updated version of the REL style guide is released. We know that some of it is slightly out of date since we've come up with the new templates on the 15 pagers. So we will be updating that soon.
So a template for methods papers would also be nice.
So for methods papers, for those of you who were involved in the REL program in the previous contract cycle, we used to have 7, I think, product lines. One of them was technical research methods. This cycle, we are not really, well, we're not publicly referring to the product lines at all. We only now have 2 templates, one for regular reports, generally reports that have findings, and then a tools template for tools, guides, you know, workbooks, things like that. So applied research methods papers now kind of skirt the line between whether they could be considered reports with findings. Most of them are not. Most of them we consider just to be tools now, and you can and should use our tools template, which is very flexible. So if you ever have any questions about which template you should be using, whether your applied research methods report falls more on the side of a report or a tool, the quick check I do is, are there findings? If there are findings, use the report template. If there are not, use the tools template. But hopefully that makes things, hopefully it makes things simpler. But the tools template is really less of a template and more of a style menu for you to use. There's, you know, you can use different types of boxes, different types of callouts, different types of everything. So it gives you more flexibility to design your report in the best way for what you're trying to present.
Okay, now let's move to processes. So, we did share this align tool, and it's not like a shattering idea, but it's, I think, a helpful way to think about your report before you get into the draft of it, and think about whether you need to modify or refine the way you were going to approach a key part of it. And again, the key goal here is to make sure the key elements of the report are aligned before you flush out all of the details. And one way to approach this in the drafting of a report is as you are proceeding with the analysis and generating findings, start just jotting down what are the most important findings that might rise to the level of the bolded points in the key findings section report. And for some of them, what are the potential implications that would be of greatest interest to your audience? And make sure those implications are aligned with those key points. And then confirm that both of those are aligned with the motivation you're planning to outline in the why this study section and the research questions, which generally you may be planning to draw on the original proposal, which has outlined the motivation and the research questions. But it's certainly possible that by the time you complete the analysis, that, you know, some of the data wasn't really adequate to address a question, in which case you may need to delete a question, or you may want to tweak a question or even add a question if you found some findings that you think are really important and set up other findings and clarify other findings. So in that case, think about how the motivation needs to change, how the research questions might need to be tweaked, and make sure they're all aligned with the most important findings and implications. And then, you know, drafting a more detailed outline could be helpful. And of course, this can be an iterative process where as you're developing a detailed outline, you may check again for alignment. And as you're developing that outline, just think about whether you need to resequence any points or add points to tell a really clear story that answers the questions in a logical fashion. And then finally, after the report is drafted, where a lot could happen by the time you put it all together, including changes in the outline, just read through the topic sentences again, which Marisa and Liz noted. That's the way many readers will read your report, at least initially. So make sure as you read through the first sentence of every paragraph, it tells a complete story. And you may want to put down the draft, as Liz noted, and turn back to it a day or two later with fresh eyes, when you might be able to see some other ways to improve it. And you could use our checklist or some other checklist just to make sure the draft is really good, and think about ways to enhance it further. Just some suggestions, but again, we'd love to hear from you what processes you found useful among not just these, but other processes that you found useful.
Josh Havila Hansen has shared one, and it's getting some thumbs up from others, including me. The advice is, what helps me is to take all the headings out, and sometimes all of the topic sentences too, and put them into a separate document. Then read them to see if they tell the story.
Great. That's terrific. Yeah, you can condense the whole report to a couple pages that way and easily see whether there are ways to improve the flow in the clip. Great idea. Any?
So Carol Shukoff suggests condensing the main points to 100 or 150 words, then build backwards from there.
Yeah, that's kind of a similar point, but it's kind of like the elevator speech. You have about 30 seconds to tell your story. How would you do it?
Steve Plank says, talking it out with a colleague helps. When you're stuck writing, can you just tell the story in spoken word in 2 minutes? That's kind of like the elevator speech too, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes that helps you to get unstuck.
Yeah. And maybe 30, not quite enough time. A taller
He said
building.
2 minutes. He said 2 minutes.
Right. And yes, these are really good. We'll find a way to condense them and synthesize them. Okay. Well, feel free to sharing because we're going to capture this chat. Here's one more from Chris. That's
Yes, I'm supposed to read that. Asking someone else to read the report and then briefly summarize it back to you can give you a sense of which points are sticking and what readers are understanding.
nice. Thank you, Chris. Feel free to keep going with these because we can capture them all. But let's turn to the next slide. So this was also a popular item in the Menti poll, and we've heard this before and are not offended in the least. You know, just as you folks are finding better to serve your region, we're trying to improve the REL peer review team and editing team, and we are aware that the support and comments we provide are not always perfect, and sometimes they may be unclear. Sometimes they're inconsistent with other comments you've received from other reviewers. And we'd like to hear back from you when we do that, when we haven't been helpful, because that helps us improve. So certainly if any of our comments are not clear, do just ask for a call with one of us. And we're happy to jump on the phone quickly to try to clarify or work through any issue. And when our comments are inconsistent or don't seem helpful or on target, you know, do share feedback. Probably do it through your core, but I'm certainly interested in hearing feedback in any way.
And this is Amy again. I'll just speak on behalf of all of IES. This issue doesn't just come up with RPR, of course. It comes up because, you know, it's first read by your REL core, then by RPR, then by Liz and Matt, then by CDI. You're getting lots of comments and suggestions from lots of different people. And, you know, naturally they may give you differing advice on what to do. I think that you should feel free if, you know, if there's a situation where where RPR, you go back and forth with RPR to really specify what a particular section of the report should say or how it should be described, and then a later reviewer asks you to totally change it, like, feel free to mention, you know, we wrote it this way because of these reasons, and we went through this with RPR, and here's exactly why we landed on this. The later reviewers are not always aware of every round of revision that's happened before, like you are, and that context can be helpful. So that we're aware of the conversations and decisions that have been made previously. And so we can, you know, consider those, because maybe, you know, a later reviewer didn't, you know, it just didn't think of that, or that issue, or that clarification that you've already made. So don't be afraid, I think, to point that out where something has been thoughtfully considered and a decision was made. You shouldn't feel like you're being pulled in different directions every time a new person picks up the report. Some of that is going to just be unavoidable, but I do think that you know, you should feel free to explain why decisions were made, and if you really feel like something is justified, you know, stand up for what's written there, and then we can have a discussion, just like you can have calls with RPR. You can have calls with anybody, and we're happy to talk through it. Sometimes it does help a lot to talk about a report versus go back and forth, you know, in comment bubbles. So feel free, if you want to talk something through with any of us, feel free to suggest that to your core, and we can make that happen.
I just want to point out that Matt put a comment in the box too. Matt, I don't know if you want to talk about this or if you just want me to read it, but he's saying, you know, also feel free to point out this comment sort of if you really litigated something, feel free to make that clear before a report even comes to Matt and Liz. So kind of head it off at the pass in a certain way. Give somebody a heads up that this has really been a focus of discussion already. There's another question in the chat box that we've touched on it a little bit, but I wonder if it might be worth coming back to it. And this is a question from Michelle Hodara. And And she points out that, after we go through this, which I think that this is sort of like, the alignment, for example, it often means that the research questions have to be adjusted to align with the findings. But then the research questions are very different from what was in the proposal. And is this a problem? So Josh or Amy?
So I can attempt, and then Amy, you can correct and add.
Okay.
If you are refining the questions or deleting a question that really couldn't be answered, adding a question that you've already, generated as part of the analysis and really is important and has implications that kind of goes clearly along with the others, then that makes sense to modify the questions in that way. If there's a wholesale or very substantial change in the questions, it's best to get some feedback from your core. And it's a judgment call, I guess, about at what point necessary. And maybe Amy, you can speak to that.
Yeah, that sounds right. I think the answer depends on how much you think needs to change and why. If, like Josh said, if you're just sort of better specifying the research question because you realize, it could be more clear or more specific, that's fine, of course. If you get to the end of your study and realize that your findings are not answering your research questions, I would press you to examine why your analysis changed so much from what was proposed and approved. We all spend a lot of time, revising and reviewing and approving these complex and comprehensive analysis plans. So if you end up doing something different, that should be something that you're discussing with your core along the way, so that we don't get a report and then go back to the proposal and it's not the same thing. I mean, if your core is going back and saying, this isn't what you proposed, where did these research questions and findings come from? That's a problem, and that should be something that you're talking about along the way. So having those discussions early on will help. We can all, if something needs to change in your analysis plan, because that's not unexpected. There's lots of reasons why something might need to change. That's fine, as long as we know about it. If something is changing drastically, we can send, a summary to RPR for a quick check and get that approved, and we'll all be on the same page with what will come in the draft report. So I hope that answers your question. It depends. It depends if you're just clarifying research questions, always fine. If your findings are not answering your research questions, that leads to another discussion of why not. But ultimately, either way, of course, using that alignment tool, whether the findings and analysis need to be changed in order to answer those questions, or whether the questions need to be changed so that there is alignment, we want to make sure that there is a consistent thread throughout of what did the stakeholder want to know, what did you examine, what did you find, and what can they do with that?
And Ruth, I see another kind of follow-up to Matt's point here, kind of documenting key decisions from Fiona.
Yeah. So this is a question about whether a memo summarizing key decisions would be helpful. This relates back to the previous conversation about whether there's points that have been really worked through, how to communicate that to a subsequent reviewer. So the question is, would that be helpful? Really, if it would that be uploaded to SharePoint with a report so it can kind of travel with the document to subsequent reviewers?
Yeah. And of course, are the memos, the review memos that reviewers produce at each round of review. And we are asking subsequent reviewers, if they're not the same ones, to look at those to make sure they're aware of comments. But there's a question at the point when REL peer review has completed its work, whether there's a summary memo of some kind. And about that and talk about if there are ways to deal with that. Amy, do you have any about that?
I don't think we're going to require that everybody do this. If you feel like writing a summary memo would be helpful to future reviewers, you can certainly upload that to the memos folder in SharePoint and just let your core know that it's there. So we will make sure to pull it out when the next round of review starts. One thing just to keep in mind if you do go that route is that we also want, to the extent that the questions raised you're anticipating that the next person reading the report might have the same questions, consider ways of signaling why those decisions were made in the report itself, maybe in the appendix or wherever is appropriate, so that the end reader doesn't also need that memo to understand why you did what you did, without being overly making it too long, but where you can, and I think RPR pushes writers to do this in the methods box and in the appendices also, but like if you have there's many options of how you can do your analyses. Explaining why you made the choices you made can be done right there in the report as well, so that everybody can understand the limitations of what you couldn't do and why you made the choices you did. So certainly if you want to put it into a memo to help the other reviewers, great. If it's something that is so unexpected or unclear in the report, think about what the reader at the end will need to know about that too in the report.
Okay. I think we're at time. I want to thank everybody, Amy, Liz, Matt, Chris and Meta at CDI, Marisa and Ruth, and everybody who participated here and shared some really great ideas. And we'll be sharing those resources and tips and tools. And please continue to share and feedback through your core. Really appreciate it. Again.
This is Amy. I'll just say, yeah, I'm going to echo it again. If you think of something after this webinar that you have questions or concerns or frustrations about, please let us know. If you have a suggestion of what is working really great for your REL, let us know and we can share it with the other RELs as well. We know we have a ton of reports that are being drafted right now so that they can be released by the end of the contract. So this is kind of crunch time of writing and revising reports. So we want to keep this conversation going about how to make that process as smooth and as painless for all of us as possible, so that we can get these reports out efficiently. So please let us know if we can help in any way.
Thank you. Bye-bye.